everyone, take a good look at the person sitting on your left. All right, now go ahead and look at the person sitting on your right. Okay, thank you for your cooperation. Can I just have you guys think for a moment? Do you know them? Who were you looking at? Have they experienced what you experienced? Have you experienced what they experienced? Do you guys have the same culture, religion? What about color?
All right, so first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. Thanks for your cooperation. You'll see where that ties into our talk. My name's Sarah, and this is Jayla, and that's Kaleni, and we're going to talk to you today about discrimination on the basis of gender, race, and religion. We've done considerable research on the effects of intercultural communication on discrimination based on gender, race, and religion. And how effective intercultural communication provides solutions for reducing this issue. Today, we're going to take a closer look at discrimination on the basis of gender, race, and religion, and we're going to show you how using the Bennett's theory of intercultural sensitivity to improve our intercultural communication will help reduce discrimination. But before we get started, let's see what discrimination is. As you can see in this picture, you got the little black ducks are not letting the little yellow one in. Discrimination is often based on arbitrary factors, such as maybe you don't look like the rest of the group. And that's often based on foolish things. But a simple discrimination, the definition of discrimination is treating a person or group of people differently. The little blue fish, you can't eat the orange ones. So we're going to talk about discrimination on the basis of gender, race, and religion. I'm going to cover the topic of gender discrimination. I'm going to inform you on the importance of improving our intercultural communication using our Bennett's theory in order to solve the issue of gender discrimination. There are many implications to gender discrimination. I'm going to focus on two: the gender wage gap and discrimination in divorce in regards to childhood custody. So, first we're going to talk about the gender wage gap. According to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, women make 20% less than men. This is according to 2015 data. Part of this is due to job segregation by gender. Jobs that are primarily staffed by women pay less than those that are primarily staffed by men. This may be due to what you call something known as worker characteristics. In his article, Human Capital, Gary Becker explained, which was published by the University of Chicago Press in 1993, Gary Becker explained that worker characteristics do indeed differ according to gender. Women's choices about education, working hours, and job interruptions, such as maternal leave, may affect the type of career they enter. If there's a whole bunch of women all entering the same career, and there's only a limited number of jobs, they may be inclined to take less pay in order to land the job, because it's often better to get something rather than nothing. And this is further widening the gender wage gap. Some of this gender wage gap issue may be also due to favoritism. We often think of discrimination as being negative, but a lot of it can be indeed unintentional by favoring someone else that we maybe know better. Anthony Greenwald, a University of Washington psychologist, said in the quote to UW Today, "We can produce discrimination without having any intent to discriminate or any dislike for those who end up disadvantaged by our behavior." Anthony Greenwald, along with Thomas Pettigrew, another psychologist with the University of Washington, published an article on this subject, "With Malice Toward None and Favoritism for Some, In-Group Favoritism Enables Discrimination." They published this in the American Psychologist in 2014. In their article, they argue that favoritism is responsible for much discrimination, rather than the normal we think of as being hostility towards an out-group. They were arguing that favoritism towards an in-group was actually causing a lot of more than we actually maybe knew beforehand. Now that we've covered the issue of gender discrimination and the wage gap, now we're going to look at gender discrimination in divorce. According to the book The Second Sexism by David Benatar, which was published by the Wiley-Blackwell Press in 2012, when both parents want sole custody of a child in a divorce, mothers get it 75% of the time and fathers get it only 10% of the time. Now the rest of that is the other 15% you're wondering about. That is often due to maybe the children went to custody of a relative or something like that. So that's what the extra stuff goes to. This is obviously not fair to the fathers because they're only getting it 10% of the time. But But we have also found this is not just in the U.S. at large, this also has happened in California. A California study by Eleanor E. McAbee and Robert H. McNookin, Dividing the Child, Social and Legal Dilemmas of Custody, which was published by the Harvard University Press in 1992, found that when both parents requested physical custody, mothers were twice as likely to get it as the fathers. This is actually rather concerning, considering our state is known as progressive in regards to legal rights and gender roles. Part of this may be due to parental stereotypes. Why are the dads getting like the short end of the stick when it comes to childhood custody? Well, there's a thing called parental stereotypes, which was a result of the tender years doctrine, which was very popular for many years. In their article, Gender Discrimination, which was published by Facts on File in 2011, Paul J. Quirk and William Cunyon stated that for many years, courts favored mothers when they awarded childhood custody. But in the late 70s, this did begin to change, with some states adopting a gender-neutral approach. But in 2011, only 20 states actually did this, so we still have a lot of room to go. Now, what is causing all these issues between members of the opposite sex? Why do we have gender discrimination in the workplace? Why do we have it in divorce in regards to childhood custody? Well, we can look at gender as a subcultural factor. John Gray, PhD, in his book, Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus, which was published by the HarperCollins Publishers in 2004, explained that gender differences have a huge impact on communication. Men and women communicate in very different ways, and it can sometimes seem like they're speaking a different language. And this is probably causing some of the discrimination, because gender discrimination is often due to misunderstanding. How can we solve this misunderstanding? Well, if we look at misunderstandings between members of the opposite sex in the light of intercultural communication, we can use the intercultural theory, the Bennett's theory of intercultural sensitivity, to help improve our communication. Whether intentional or as byproduct of favoritism, these discrimination is often the result of misunderstandings. For example, in the workplace, a male employer who's not comfortable with female employees will not be likely to hire or promote them. He'll probably choose a male who he understands because he can communicate well with him. Conversely, in the educational system, a female teacher or professor who doesn't communicate well with her male students may not provide them with enough support to excel in the challenging subject. Thereby, they don't feel like they can't understand her, maybe they can't really get her ear, and then they might give up in discrimination. Both of these situations are not good, not ideal, and both can be improved through better communication. Milton J. Bennett, in his article, Towards Ethno-Relativism, a Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, which was published in 1993 by the Intercultural Press, explained his Bennett's theory of intercultural sensitivity. The first three steps of Bennett's theory, denial, defense, and minimization. In the context of gender, denying that there are fundamental differences between men and women is foolish. We know that there are differences. We know that we communicate differently. Now, feeling defensive only creates hostility, and hostility is not where proper communication thrives. And the minimization, pretending that there is no problem, that there is no gender discrimination, doesn't lead to solutions either. In order to solve a problem, we must first admit that it indeed exists. The last three stages of Bennett's theory, acceptance, adaptation, integration, are where we need to be in order to solve the issue of gender discrimination. In acceptance, we need to understand that differences are good. Variety is good. Different strengths are wonderful. We want them all. We need everyone. And in adaptation, we abandon gender bias and be open-minded. In integration, we can adopt communication styles that both men and women can relate to. And if we all can relate to the communication, we all understand, and therefore we will communicate well with each other and understand each other. And then quit being discriminatory. At the end, that's the end goal, is to quit discriminating. So if we look at gender as a subcultural factor, and we view the misunderstanding as culture conflict, we can apply the Bennett theory, which I just explained to you, to improve our gender communication and solve gender-based discrimination. We need to remember that everyone is of equal value, though we may have different strengths. Negativity and playing favorites will only divide us. This is not grade school where we play boys against girls. We're all one team. Now that I've solved the issue of gender discrimination, I'm going to pass it off to Jayla, who's going to inform us on racial discrimination.
Rude, lazy, unreliable, poor, uneducated. According to Devine and Elliott's journal, Stereotypes and Prejudice, their automatic and controlled components, written in 1989, and their study in 2000, Are Racial Stereotypes Really Fading? This is what people thought about the African American community. Rapist is the word our new president chose to describe the Latino community in July of 2015, and Hillary Clinton, our runner-up for president, described people of color as predators in 1996 when the war on drugs was prevalent. I will be discussing discrimination on how the media represents people of color and how the U.S. educational system also represents people of color. The most common stereotype is that Latino Americans are undocumented immigrants. A study by the National Hispanic Coalition in 2012 observed that 30% of non-Latinos believe half of the Latinos in America were undocumented immigrants when showed negative stereotypes. Even when shown positive stereotypes, they felt the same way. In D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, produced in 1915, the stereotype of African Americans as savages was born. This movie portrayed African Americans as predators and rapists. This negative stereotype affects African American communities all over today and also affects other races by subconscious racial biases. Because it is heavily seen in news, movies, and social media, this is what this subconscious bias looks like. So now I will be showing you a video on racial bias and what students in different schools think of.
Are in school together and they're in the hallway, and I'd like you to tell me what you think is happening in this next chapter.
She probably looks like she's gonna steal it because Marcia's like,
I'm not sure what's going on here. Sorry.
oh no, what happened? And he's like, hey, look, $20.
And so, do you think that Renee is doing something good, bad, or just neutral?
I think she's gonna take it.
Do you think that Renee and Marcy are likely to be friends or not?
Not really.
And what do you think about Marcy's parents? Do you think they'd be comfortable with her being friends with Renee or not?
Well, if they find out the situation that happened, they might be a little concerned about if Renee's a thief.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're
This
having a
one,
little
yeah.
technological issues here, so just hold on just 1 minute and bear with us. I think we have a little issue going on with our YouTube. Okay, let me go back here. Okay. Let's pause this. Pause.
So as you can see, Michaela's perception of Renee is that she will steal the money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you can go to the second video.
It's muted in the bottom right.
Since doing something good, bad, or neutral?
Pretty good.
And what about Allison and Erica? Do you think they're probably friends or not so much?
Yeah, they're probably friends.
Okay. Do you think Erica's parents would like it if she was friends with Allison?
Yeah.
Her responses, according to our expert, Dr.
So when showed the exact same picture of the races in different roles, Michaela's perception is that Allison will return the money. Allison is a sweet girl because in her mind she sees her skin color and she sees that in my way I would give the money back to Renee.
What do you think happened in this picture?
They got her pushed her.
And what do you think is going to happen next?
Brandon's gonna help her for bus.
So do you think that Randy's doing something that's okay, not okay, or kind of...
So this African American student in this portion reiterates Michaela's actions. By Carrie, the white girl, she thought that she pushed Abby down. And when showed the exact opposite, she thought the same person, Brenda, who was black, would help Sarah, who is white, pick up her books.
When you see that, what goes through your mind? Is there a conversation you want to have with her? Is there stuff you want to know more about?
I would definitely want to pursue that conversation with her and find out why her perception was different based upon the color of the girl's skin. What changed in that scenario in her head?
It's a teachable moment. It's a, it's a realization like, well, maybe we have to do
a better job or focus more on distinguishing about racism and diversity.
So as you can see, Michaela's parents in this video sees that Michaela has a subconscious racial bias. As shown, they understand that it is important to have a conversation with her about race. Both girls in this video believe that their race would not show discrimination to each other, but they both believe that they would be discriminated against by the other race. So this subconscious bias and discrimination affects our educational system also. Before the Brown versus Board of Education trial in 1957, schools throughout the U.S. were heavily segregated. After this trial was passed, the schools were integrated. And although this was a paradigm shift in American history, schools are still ethnically unequal. Black and Latino students attend mostly majority-minority schools. These are schools that are in lower-income areas. And according to CivilRights.org, a study in 2010 shows that Black students made up 74.1% of these schools, and Latino students made up 79.1% of these schools. Through 1980 and 2009, it has increased dramatically. Before, Latinos were 28.8%, and in 2009, it increased to 43.1%. For Black students, 33.2%, and increased to 38.1%. So my question was, if there was such a small percentage of white students going to schools in low-income areas and an increase in students of color going to school in low-income areas, where were these white students going to school at? So according to this chart by the Southern Education Foundation, studied in March of 2016, white students attending private schools was 20.8% higher in California compared to students of color whose attendance was negative 30.8% to negative 24% in California. These people of color aren't even existing in these schools pretty much. There's a very small percentage of people of color in private schools. So this shows that schools are still heavily segregated by socioeconomic class, being that people of color do not attend private schools. Our educational system continues to perpetuate discrimination by increasing the achievement gap between students of color and white students. Education and media is what influences kids today. When kids are separated by socioeconomic class and by ethnicity, intercultural communication is so much more difficult to make effective. In the Bennett theory, as you saw before, there are 6 stages of intercultural communication: denial, defense, minimalization, acceptance, and adaptation and integration. In order to move to these last 3 steps, we must implement positive images of a diverse group of people. Parents should have conversations with their children about race, and our educational system must be equal. One great way to open up the dialogue about race is to study abroad. There are programs such as Yes Abroad, NISLE, CBYX that take students from 9th to 12th grade and let them learn for a whole year, a school year, and most of these are paid costs by the U.S. Department of State. I have attended one of these programs and I greatly recommend it, and this is a great way to open up intercultural communication. So now I will pass it on to Kalini, who will talk about religious discrimination.
All right, thank you, Shayla. So I will be speaking on religious discrimination. I will start off with freedom of religion, religious discrimination, where religious discrimination is found, and solutions using the Bennett scale. So according to the History of Religious Conflicts in the United States, Eric Wong, December 6, 2002, the United States has remained a country of 2 things: immigrants and a diversity of unmatched religions. Religion is a specific core set of beliefs and practices agreed upon numbers of persons. In 1791, when the Bill of Rights was first adopted, the First Amendment passed as a law respecting and legalizing the promise of freedom: freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, right to petition, and freedom of religion. This amendment was protected to not let any bias nor favor interfere with government interference. and this law, freedom of religion, was passed. But in reality, freedom of religion came with religious discrimination. Religious discrimination is an unequal treatment towards an individual or a group based on their beliefs. Religious discrimination is being found in many areas and places also. It's being found in violence. There is a lot of disagreement because of a religion, or people is being killed because of their religion. Religious discrimination is being found in social media. There is many stereotypes that aims for people like you and I to turn against a religion or have a negative opinion for a religion. Religious discrimination is being found in public. As you can see, this sign right here, it was in a shopping mall parking lot in Houston. And the fact that this sign was aiming towards a specific religion, Muslims in general, you can see that they are treating them unequal, and that's considered religious discrimination. Religious discrimination is being found in art that's supposed to be funny or seen as a joke. As funny as jokes are supposed to be, it's still discriminating towards a specific religion. And it is creating a kind of toxic learning environment in which these students or people feel like they are under attack because of their faith. Religious discrimination is being found in the workplace. So there's supposed to be a picture here about the article, so just letting you know. It's being found in the workplace. According to the article Tannenbaum's 2013 survey of American workers and religion, religious discrimination is very much alive in the workplace. This article was a research where they were giving surveys to about 500 Fortune companies. This article was to shed light on the reality of religion, to shed light on the workers, on how they really feel about religious discrimination and how they are really treated.